Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Kim. It's nice to see all your faces for the first time and perhaps the last time. It's almost the end of the term. Congratulations for making it. Um, so I did my paper on a topic a little bit different than I think most people chose. I decided to look at aging in Southeast Asia. I actually chose this topic partially because my sister actually just received her PhD, and her research was in Taiwan looking at age stereotypes and self-views of aging and kind of the similar stuff. So I thought it was really interesting, pretty cool. I got to work with her and ask her some questions, so it was pretty fun. I'm not sure if fun's the right word for paper, but anyway, okay, I'll get started. So what I wanted to talk about was obviously aging, what it means as an identity, how it works in Southeast Asia, what kind of challenges they face in Southeast Asia. So I spent a good chunk of the beginning of my paper talking about what it means to identify as old or elderly. And the first thing I think that was really important is that while basing your age off of a calendar is useful, like I am 19 years old, whatever, that's maybe not the best way to identify someone, and it seems that a lot of professionals agree that age is more dependent on how you feel rather than how you just stack up in terms of years. And while that might not be true for like applying for Social Security or whatever, that's really what it comes down to in terms of self-views and that kind of stuff. So that's kind of how I defined aging. And also this is really more fluid than I think it feels like, and it's really dependent on, like what's going on around you. It changes as you move across the lifespan, changes depending on your social role, just how you identify, what's going on around you. So it's definitely a very fluid definition. Also, another piece that is going into that aging identity is what other people are perceiving around you. And so this kind of like other view, so people who don't identify as aging, how they view people who are old, I think is very important because it definitely affects the way that an elderly person looks at themselves. It affects the self-views. So if you're looking at an elderly person and you say, oh, they're full of life experience and very wise, like that might feel great for an older person, but if you're looking at some negative views of that person, they can't take care of themselves, they're a burden, that's very negative for the person who identifies that way, obviously. And actually it's been shown that this can have an effect on like people's quality of life and their health. So this is a really serious thing. So anyway, as we get into the Southeast Asia part, I did a lot of my research based off of a meta-analysis by North and Fisk, and it was looking at perceptions of aging in West cultures and East cultures, so East as in East Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia, and West as in US and Europe. And so they mentioned at first that it may seem going into this study that Eastern cultures would be more accepting, more supportive or reverent of older people, mostly because of this interdependent culture that they have, as well as things like filial piety in Confucian-based cultures, things like that. There's also equivalents in like Muslim and Buddhist cultures, whatever. Basically, this is very deeply ingrained in their society. And so you kind of go into the study thinking that, but as it turns out, the study shows that the Eastern cultures actually had very much more negative perceptions of aging than West cultures did. And it turns out that there was actually a very strong correspondence between these negative views and a aging society or aging country. And this seems kind of counterintuitive because it has also been shown that more contact with elderly people makes more positive views, but when you really look at what happens in an aging society, it's some pretty heavy stuff. So looking at this, East Asia was the most negative, but Southeast Asia was still significantly more negative than the West. So when we start looking at Southeast Asia, kind of looking at demographics, they are indeed a very quickly aging region of the world. In fact, Thailand was one of the most negative in the study, one of the most negative countries in the study, and also it is one of the most quickly aging, which is pretty interesting. So yeah, so then we kind of dive into some problems that the older people are facing when this happens, and in fact the whole country or region is facing. And so the first thing is when a country ages, basically the mortality rate goes down, the birth rate goes down, so then you have a lot of people after kind of a baby boom, a lot of growing older people with not a lot of people to replace them. So you have a lot of people exiting the workforce needing support and not as many people entering the workforce to support them. And so this is the basis of a lot of problems. And so typically in the past, the elderly people would rely on family or community to support them. And so I mentioned the article about the Malay people on Langkawi and their strong family and kin ties, and I thought that was a really beautiful example of this community lifestyle. But at the same time, as great as that is, currently in Malaysia, 60% of elderly people are abandoned by their children because either they can't take care of them or they won't take care of them. So this support system of family or community, as great as it is becoming less secure and threatened by some other outside forces putting pressure on it. So that's not something that elderly people can rely on at this point, for sure, anymore. So yeah, that's really not a good thing. Where do they go? This has been something that they've relied on for a long time. So in order to counter that, it makes sense to me that a lot of elderly people would try and stay in the workforce as long as they can to support themselves. And actually this would make a lot of sense. You're keeping the workforce as full as you can. Tax revenue is going to support the elderly population. But at the same time, these elderly people are often discouraged from working. Employers are reluctant to hire them. The younger population want them out of the workforce so that they can have a higher chance of success. They have outmoded skills potentially. Let's see. Oh, and oftentimes the governments themselves are against this. For example, Indonesia has a mandatory retirement age of 55, which may have made sense a couple years ago when people only lived to like 60 or 65 years old, but now that people are living to 70, 80, 90 years old, it's just not viable for these people who need to support themselves. So, of course, that leads to government support, and these people need support from the government if they can't get it from themselves or from their family. And up until recently, this has been relatively absent. I chose to look at Thailand for this section, and basically just showed that they have ended up developing some support systems for elderly people, which is really great. So just programs to support positive attitude toward aging and older persons, which I thought was great, especially looking back at what I wrote of in the beginning of my paper. So kind of stemming at the source. Also just health and social protection, all these kind of things that the elderly need to be taken care of. So that's pretty much the bulk of my essay. So basically you're looking at a population, too many old people, not enough younger people to take care of them. In Southeast Asia, there's a lot of negative stereotypes, negative self-views going into being old. And, obviously that's a really big problem. We're all going to be old someday. I think that age is something that ties people together across borders, all across the world. Age is something that we all experience, and it's an identity that we all have. And so looking at Southeast Asia, where we have a very negative perception or a negative spin on this identity, and it has a lot of problems going on with it. So it was definitely a very interesting topic to look at. But I think that with kind of this industrialization of these countries, and hopefully in the future they will be able to kind of correct this and support their elderly population more. And I think that we can see that like with the example of Thailand. So that's all I have. Just wanted to thank you guys for a great term, especially Professor Moore. I really enjoyed your class, so sorry this video is twice as long as it was supposed to be. Yikes. But yeah, I hope you all have a great break, and thanks.